sure. 38 days into the most desperate voyage of their lives, the Robertson family had stored enough dried turtle meat and rainwater to believe they might finally row toward Central America that night. But 6 people crowded into a 10-foot dinghy, 200 miles from the nearest coast, weren't celebrating yet. They'd already watched their inflatable raft disintegrate 16 days earlier, forcing them into a space barely large enough for 3 adults, let alone a family of 5 plus a hitchhiking crewman. The question wasn't whether they'd survive, it was how much longer their bodies could function on turtle blood and raw fish before the Pacific claimed them. Dougal Robertson wasn't chasing adventure when he bought the Lucette in Malta with his family's entire savings. The 43-foot wooden schooner, built in 1922, was supposed to be a practical vessel for a practical plan. Sail his wife Lynn, their daughter Anne, son Douglas, and twin boys Neil and Sandy across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, then onward to the South Pacific Islands. Robertson had spent years in the British Merchant Navy after studying at Leith Nautical College in Scotland, and he'd left maritime life only after tragedy struck during World War II when the SS Sagging was attacked at Trincomalee in Sri Lanka in 1942. His first wife Jessie and his son Duncan were killed in that attack. By 1971, remarried to Linda Poyser, a nurse and working as a dairy farmer, Robertson had enough sailing experience to believe this voyage was manageable. They departed Falmouth, Cornwall on January 27, 1971. Over the next year and a half, the family moved steadily westward, stopping at Caribbean ports and eventually transiting the Panama Canal. Anne left the voyage in the Bahamas, deciding the journey wasn't for her. In Panama, they picked up Robin Williams, an inexperienced crew member who wanted passage to the Galápagos Islands and beyond. By mid-June 1972, the Lucette was sailing west of the Galápagos, bound for the scattered islands of the South Pacific. The voyage had been largely uneventful. The schooner handled well. The family had settled into the rhythms of ocean passage. Nothing suggested what was about to happen. On June 15, 1972, approximately 200 miles west of the Galápagos, a pod of orcas struck the hull. The wooden schooner that had carried the family across an ocean was holed below the waterline. Water poured in faster than any pump could manage. The Lucette was sinking, and the 6 people aboard had minutes to grab whatever they could reach before the ship went under. They launched an inflatable life raft and a solid-hull dinghy, threw in bread, biscuits, and fruit, and abandoned the only shelter they had. The documented orca attack, one of the few recorded in the Pacific, left them adrift with minimal tools and provisions in one of the most isolated stretches of ocean on Earth. The inflatable raft became their primary refuge at first, with the dinghy towed behind using a jury-rigged sail. But the Pacific Ocean west of the Galápagos isn't a shipping lane. They were drifting in one of the least trafficked stretches of open water on Earth. No distress signal had gone out. No one knew the Lucette had sunk. No one knew where to look for them. Rescue would only happen if a vessel happened to cross their path, and the odds of that decreased with every nautical mile they drifted. Robertson had to assume they were entirely on their own. The first problem was water. They'd managed to retrieve some from the sinking Lucette before the ship disappeared entirely, but 6 people in tropical heat burned through drinking water faster than rain can replenish it. Robertson made the decision to sail northeast toward the doldrums, the equatorial zone where converging trade winds create frequent rainstorms. If they could position themselves under those storms, they could collect rainwater in whatever containers they had. If they couldn't, dehydration would kill them long before starvation. The human body can survive weeks without food, but only days without water, and in the exposed heat of the Pacific, that timeline compressed even further. The water they'd salvaged ran out. Rain remained unpredictable. Robertson and his family began drinking turtle blood. Sea turtles were catchable if you had patience and the strength left to haul them aboard, and their blood provided fluid, even if it tasted like warm iron, and carried the constant risk of contamination. They caught turtles whenever possible, along with dorado and flying fish that could be eaten raw. The bread and biscuits from the Lucette were gone within days. Everything now depended on what the ocean provided and what their bodies could tolerate. There was no backup plan. There were no emergency rations. They were eating and drinking whatever kept them alive one more day. 16 days after the sinking, the inflatable raft failed. The material had degraded under constant sun and saltwater exposure, and it could no longer hold air. 6 people now had to fit inside a dinghy 10 feet long and 3 meters in its longest dimension. Dougal and Lynn, Douglas, the twins Neil and Sandy, and Robin Williams were pressed together in a space designed for recreational rowing, not open ocean survival. There was no room to stretch out, no way to escape the sun during the day or the cold at night. Sleep became a rotation of whoever could wedge themselves into the least uncomfortable position while the others stayed upright. Every movement had to be coordinated. A single person's shifting weight could destabilize the boat. Their bodies were breaking down in measurable ways. Saltwater sores opened on any exposed skin and refused to heal in the constant wet environment. Muscle mass disappeared as their bodies consumed themselves for energy. Dehydration became a constant baseline state, alleviated only by sporadic rain or the metallic taste of turtle blood. The twins were children, and children have smaller reserves to draw on. Robin Williams had no prior survival training and was dependent on the Robertsons' knowledge and decision-making. Every person in that dinghy was burning calories they couldn't replace and losing strength they couldn't recover. The physical deterioration was cumulative and irreversible without real food, clean water, and rest. Robertson kept a journal. He wrote in it when he had the energy, recording what they caught, what they consumed, and how far they estimated they traveled. The journal wasn't optimism, it was documentation in case someone found their bodies or the dinghy washed ashore. But it also gave him a task, something to focus on besides the slow erosion of their chances. The act of writing implied a future where someone would read it. That implication, however faint, mattered when every day felt like the one that might finally break them. By the 38th day, they had somehow accumulated reserves. Dried turtle meat, stored carefully in the limited space they had. Fresh water, caught from recent rainstorms and saved in every container that could hold liquid. Enough that Robertson believed they could begin rowing to speed their northeastern progress towards Central America. They'd been drifting and sailing with improvised rigging for more than 5 weeks, covering an unknowable distance at the mercy of wind and current. Rowing would give them control, however marginal. The plan was to start that night. It was the first time since the sinking that they'd had enough resources to do more than simply survive until the next turtle, the next rainstorm, the next dawn. They never started rowing. On July 23, 1972, the Japanese fishing trawler Tokamaru II spotted the dinghy while en route to the Panama Canal. 6 emaciated people were pulled from a boat that had somehow kept them alive for 38 days in open water. The family that had left Cornwall 17 months earlier with a wooden schooner and a plan to see the world returned with nothing but the clothes they wore and a handwritten journal Robertson had kept in case they were rescued. Dougal Robertson turned that journal into a book. Survived the Savage Sea, published in 1973, documented every decision they'd made and every resource they'd exhausted. He later wrote Sea Survival, a manual, a technical guide that distilled what he'd learned into practical instruction. That manual was used years later to help save Steven Callahan, who survived 76 days adrift in the Atlantic in 1981. Robertson continued sailing until cancer killed him in 1991. Lynn returned to running their dairy farm. Douglas eventually joined the Merchant Navy, then became an accountant, and decades later wrote his own account of the voyage in The Last Voyage of the Lucette. The family survived, but the voyage defined the rest of their lives in ways both practical and permanent. What the Robertsons survived wasn't luck. It was a sequence of decisions made under constraints that kept narrowing. Sail toward the doldrums when water runs out. Drink turtle blood when rain doesn't come. Compress 6 people into a 10-foot dinghy when the raft fails. Store dried meat and water when you finally catch enough to have surplus. 38 days is long enough for the human body to consume itself. It's long enough for children to lose the reserves that keep them alive. And it's exactly the length of time a family can survive in a dinghy in the Pacific if every single decision goes just barely right, if the wind and current carry you in a survivable direction, and if a fishing trawler happens to cross your path on the one day you finally have enough resources to believe you might make it on your own.